So today we're talking about standing firm. Last week we talked about, having faith in those hard times, even though we don't understand why, we don't understand what's going on, but trusting in God because God's bigger than us. And now we're going to talk about in hard times or in difficult times where we stand firm, standing firm in our faith. Because, it's easy to say you believe, isn't it? Anyone here, anyone out in the world can say, yeah, I'm a Christian, I believe in God, I believe in Jesus. And there's a lot of people that do say it, but then they don't put it into practice. They're not really believers. They just say it because it's convenient to say. They like the idea of it. They like some of the good ideas. They like, oh, that's kind of a good idea. I like that part of it. They don't like all parts of it, so they kind of like pick and choose what they want to believe of it. It's easy to claim that because belief is the key to salvation. Belief is the key to salvation, but true belief changes you. It inspires a change in your life. And it should be something that you want to hold on to, want to hold firm onto. And you guys know we do a Wednesday night Bible study. It's second and fourth Wednesday of the month. And this series we're doing, Not a Fan, it's very interesting, very intriguing, because it's all about not being a fan of Jesus, which initially sounds bad, doesn't it? You kind of think, not a fan of Jesus? How are we not a fan of Jesus? Because there's a difference between a fan and a follower. A fan just likes the idea, thinks it's a good idea, follows it as long as it's convenient for them. It's kind of like being a fan of an actor or an actress or a singer, fan of a sports player. You follow them as it's convenient for you until something goes wrong and they turn out to be not the best person, then we kind of stop following them. It's kind of like that way with being a fan of Jesus. But being a true follower is you follow Jesus. You follow what he says, what he does. You strive to live to that standard. You strive to live as he wants you to live, as he teaches, to follow his teachings, and to hold strong to that in those difficult times, even when it's not convenient for you, even when people might disagree with you. Does your faith endure? Does it endure when it's unpopular, when it's not convenient? If it might cost you your job to be a believer, or if it might cost you your life, would you stand firm? And many of us would like to say we would stand firm, wouldn't we? We want to say we would. We'd like to believe that, but it's something we need to examine in ourselves. That's something I try to examine in myself daily is if my life were on the line, if I was facing that same end to holding on to my belief, would I hold on to that? If my life, if my job were on the line, if I was going to lose family and friends over it, would I still claim belief? So does our faith endure? So we're going to be looking at the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which are three names that are fun to say. And they seem to just kind of have a ring to them. Just when you say them together, it just kind of flows, doesn't it? The three names you can remember: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, does anyone know what book of the Bible the story's in? Yeah, Daniel, you're right. If you know the answer, just go ahead and say it if I ask a question like that. It's the book of Daniel. Specifically, Daniel chapter 3. And we're starting verse 4. And I'm going to kind of set up what's going on here. See, the southern kingdom is in exile now. All of the Israelites are in exile. And the southern kingdom is in exile in Babylon. And you have King Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar has this big golden idol made. This big golden idol. And to give you an idea how big it is, it's approximately 9 feet wide and 90 feet tall. This giant idol. Likely it's made of wood and plated in gold, but it's a golden idol. And we don't know what the golden idol actually is, what this image is. It could be an image of Nebuchadnezzar himself, because often kings wanted to be worshipped as gods. Like there's some people who have lived or who do live who kind of have that feeling. In Michael Jackson, you look at his fans and how they reacted every time you saw him, how closely they followed him. You'd almost think that they thought him as a god. This image could also be the Babylonian god Marduk. The thing is, we don't know, but all we know is that as soon as they heard music, they were supposed to bow and worship this golden image. So here's the decree, and here's what these people are faced with here. Daniel 3, starting verse 4. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, the flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. You're going to hear those instruments again. It repeats those instruments one more time. But basically, whenever they hear an instrument, the music playing, they're required to bow down and worship this idol. Which, for those of you who are familiar with the Ten Commandments, how many commandments does that violate? How many does that violate? There's 2. It's the first 2. The first 2 commandments. First commandment, to have no other God, because God's jealous. He's the only true God. He does not like you worshiping other gods. And to have no image that you worship. Not to have an image, an idol that you're worshiping. So there's the first 2 commandments that this decree is asking the Israelites to break. It's asking them to break the first 2 commandments. And so it's kind of a pickle, isn't it? Because if they don't do this, they can be thrown into that fiery furnace, which would be a very interesting way to work on your tan. Sorry, I had to make that joke. The jokes today might be a little corny. I apologize. But a very painful way too, isn't it? It'd be like it'd be very painful. In this furnace, it's possibly something that was used to forge metal, or possibly to fire pottery. Because in the kingdom of Babylon, they had both. They had both, furnaces to forge metal and to fire pottery. So it could be either one. But either way, that's a hot place. Not a place you want to hang out. Not a place you want to be. Doesn't sound too pleasant, does that? So it's a bit of a bind, isn't it? It's either break the commandments or die by fire. So you have these 3, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they refuse. They refuse to worship this idol. And they're set in kind of places of importance in the kingdom of Babylon. They're set over some of the affairs of the kingdom. So they're not exactly like just, common folk in the kingdom. They are in positions of prominence. So their refusal to bow catches some attention. It catches some attention, and These people, they're like, we have to tell the king. They're going against the king's decree. And let me tell you, when a king back then made a decree, you didn't dare go against it, because there were consequences, and those consequences were followed. So some people are going to tell Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Some tattletales, we'll call them. They're going to rat them out. So let's continue here. Verses 8 through 12. Verses 8 through 12 here. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of," everyone say it with me, "the horn, the flute, zither, lyre, harp, fife, and all kinds of music," there you go, "must fall down and worship the image of gold. And that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you. Your Majesty, they neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." So they refuse. They refuse to worship, and these three, they're telling on him, they're like, "Look, may you live forever." So first, they're just kind of sucking up to the king, really, which is what you did to a king when you approach him. You kind of paid him some kind of honor, some kind of praise. It's to really, to make sure that he wasn't going to punish you for just coming before him and not honoring him, because it's the thing you did with kings. So, it's getting in the king's good graces and then saying, "Hey, you know what, king, you made this decree. We like your decree, by the way, just to let you know. We like this decree. And there's these three Jews over here, these three guys, people who you set into prominent positions, set over affairs in Babylon, and they're not following the decree. In fact, they say they're ignoring you, which is bad news, because you're not supposed to ignore the kings. You ignore the king, and you're taking your life in your own hands. In fact, some translations will say that they're disregarding. They're paying the king no regard. And of course, the king, that doesn't sit well with him. Nebuchadnezzar does not like this. The king is not happy. So he's going to approach these three. He's going to call them out on what they're doing. He doesn't immediately throw them into the furnace, but he questions them, gives them a chance to explain themselves, a chance to actually follow this decree. So let's go to verse 16. Verse 16 here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your Majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." So they stand firm. They're faced with being thrown into this fiery furnace. They're faced with the prospect of their demise. And they stand firm, that's a bold move. That is a very bold move. They're basically ensuring that they will be thrown into this furnace. It is going to happen. I know, it's scary, isn't it, Don? Anyone else think that's pretty scary? Yeah, you'd be pretty frightened if you were facing that, wouldn't you? I'd be frightened. I'd be shaking in my boots. I mean, I'd probably say something like that, but it would probably sound like in a very quivery voice, not a very, strong voice. But they're standing firm. They're standing firm. And here's what's interesting is they say that our God's going to deliver us. Our God who we serve will deliver us from your hand. But even if he doesn't, even if we perish in that fire, we're still not going to worship that image of gold or serve your gods. And this is, it's a saying that I heard from Dawn, heard from someone who told her this, and I'm going to keep using this, is that no matter what happens, whether God delivers you and saves your life, or you end up perishing, he has you in his hands. So no matter what, he still will deliver them, even if they survive this by some miracle or they perish. They will be delivered. They will be delivered. So they're standing firm. They're trusting in God. They will not yield. They will not give in. Even though it's not a popular opinion, even though it's risking their life, they will not yield. Let's clap for them, everyone. Isn't that amazing? Yay, those guys are awesome. So here's what happens. Here's what happens next. Let's go to verse 19. And Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. So before he gave him a chance, because he was still somewhat favorable towards them, now his attitude's changed. He's furious. He's mad at them. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army, some of the strongest soldiers here, to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, and the furnace was so hot, that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. The king's anger burned against these 3. And so the fires burned even hotter, 7 times hotter. I'm not sure how hot they were to begin with. That sounds extremely hot now. So hot that some of the strongest men in the army who take up these 3 to throw them into the blazing furnace, they die in the process. You ever been at a bonfire that's just burning tall? Can you get really close to that? No. A lot of times you can't even get within like 2 feet of that blaze because it's so hot. Imagine them just getting close enough to throw these 3 in, and they perish from the heat. They perish from the heat.
I'm glad you didn't bring props this Sunday.
I know. Could you imagine if I had props on this? Could be a bit of a fire hazard at this point. So these 3 are now in this blaze, this extremely hot blaze, 7 times hotter than normal. We're at the point where we saw in that video, that cliffhanger that I left you at. Now we get to hear about the ending. We get to hear about the ending. We get to read about the ending, which is even better. The book's always better than the movie. Remember that. The book is always better than the movie. So let's see how this ends. Let's see the resolution that a lot of us are familiar with. Let's go to verse 24. Verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, Your Majesty." Kind of like yes men, I guess. So yeah, that's true, very much. They're agreeing with the king. So Nebuchadnezzar says, look, I see 4 men. I see 4 men walking around the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Something miraculous has happened, hasn't it? Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. And so the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched. There was no smell of fire on them. The fire had absolutely no effect. God delivered them. God delivered them. They trusted in God, and God delivers them. And this amazes Nebuchadnezzar to the point where he issues another decree now. He says, if anyone says anything bad about the God of these people, you'll be cut into pieces, and your house will be just torn down and made rubble. He's like, no one can speak against this God because he's apparently something. He's powerful. He saved them from my hand, from this blazing furnace that the strongest men in my army could not stand against. And he delivered them. And they suffered no damage, not even smoke damage to their clothing. Which, if you've ever even been around a fire, you know you smell of smoke. Your clothes will smell of smoke. But he saved them from anything affecting them. God delivers them. And sometimes with us, God delivers us, whether it be in a miraculous way, whether it be in a way that we don't see right away, or sometimes our deliverances, we end up with him. But in either case, he delivers us. He has us in his hands. So would we stand firm under trials? Would we stand firm like these 3? How many here would like to say yes? Like to say yes? Yeah, we would like to, wouldn't we? We would hope that if we were faced with this problem, we would say yes. And here's the thing, in the world today, at least in this country, we don't face death. In other countries, they do. They face extreme persecution and possibly even death for being believers. But we also have a quiet persecution in this country, which is a dangerous form of persecution because it can kind of lure you away. It can lure you to not believe. You know, it's the idea that you can't disagree with someone. You can't think of something being a sin. It's just someone's lifestyle. It's just how they want to live their life. Nothing wrong with it. And if you disagree with that, if you don't like that, then they call it hate speech. They say, you're engaged in hate speech because you're saying this is sinful. You're being intolerant because you don't disagree with their lifestyle. It's a quiet persecution. That can be tempting. It can seem harmless at first, cause you to compromise. But eventually you compromise and you compromise until you've ended up so far away from where you started that you're no longer the same. You're no longer holding firm to your beliefs. So would we stand firm under these trials? Whether it's inconvenient, whether we lose family or friends, whether we risk our job, So maybe our job's asking us to do something that is sort of immoral, sort of underhanded. That was the last video we watched on Wednesday, was about a guy who his job was asking him to do something immoral, something that would have been wrong, and he refused to, and it cost him his job. Would you stand firm? So as a final thought here. True followers stand firm when it isn't easy. True followers stand firm when it isn't easy. When we're facing those persecutions, facing those trials, it's not easy to stand firm. The easy thing is to give in to that temptation. It wasn't easy for those three to just stand firm because they were facing death. But they stood firm. True followers stand firm when it isn't easy. So as you go forth this week, examine your life. Trust in God. Stand firm in your faith. Because it's not always convenient or easy, and it might be risky. But it's worth the risk. I guarantee you it is worth the risk. Join me in prayer. Lord, thank you for this day to worship you. Thank you for our right to worship you. Lord, help us to stand firm. Stand firm against the belief in you being unpopular, holding on to your teachings being what the world doesn't want us to do, spreading your word being what they stand against. Help us to stand firm, Lord, to hold on to belief in you. Whether it might risk family or friends, our life, or our well-being, Lord, help us to stand firm. Give us that strength, that conviction, that courage. Even when we're scared, even when we don't know how we're going to make it through, if we stand firm, keep us strong, Lord. Keep us strong in your word. All these things we pray in your Son's name. Amen.